to solve a particular problem, but it's a blend of either 2 ideas, 3 ideas, or 4 ideas to create it. Are you following what I'm saying here? So he took what they had, mixed it together to create that. And when we show gratitude to God for things there, what happens is our minds begin to open up. In fact, the only way God was telling me that, look, he said, it is anxiety that blocks this thing. Lack of gratitude is what blocks it. He said, have I not said that consider the lilies, all right, and look at the animals, look at all of that. He says, do you see them, you yourself? He said, do you by anxiety add 1 cubit to your stature? In other words, what blocks the supply? The ants are getting the supply from God, all right, the flowers are getting the supply from God, but human beings are not getting that supply. And the reason is because of anxiety. They are anxious about certain things. So when he says, consider these things, he is saying, show gratitude to me for these things. What will kill anxiety is that we begin, says, your Father knoweth that you have need of these things. And as you show him gratitude there for the things that he is doing, those supply lines begin to open up. So the righteousness of God is now revealed from faith, all right, to faith. And so what's the revelation of this righteousness that produces faith, that leads to the power of God, that gets us results beyond that which we were even expecting? Now in Romans chapter 10 and verse 1, Paul began to speak. He said, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer for God, all right, to Israel, is that they might be saved. He said, for I bear them record that they have a zeal of God. So Paul was saying Israel has a zeal there for God. And he was praying for the salvation of Israel. He wasn't seeing the results. Nothing was happening and nothing was changing. And here is what we'll call apostolic prayer, because, I mean, you couldn't have after Jesus a greater apostle than Paul. If Paul was doing apostolic prayer for you, you will think you are made. That's it. But he says they were not saved. And then he looked at them again, he says, and I also bear record that they have a zeal for God. In other words, these people are very zealous, and honestly, they're really active, all right, for God, and true passion for God and the things of God. In fact, when Paul was killing apostles and doing all of that, it was a zeal for God. There was that zeal that was simply transferred. But he had a zeal for God that made him do those things which were very harmful. He said, so they have a zeal for God, and I'm praying for them. And then next verse, it says, but the problem is, it says they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. In other words, they don't have a certain knowledge. And zeal without knowledge can even be counterproductive in the life of that particular person. You can be very zealous about something, but if you don't have the knowledge for that particular thing there, then your activities can become destructive. I mean, if, God forbid, a person has an accident or fell down, and the person doesn't have the knowledge of a first responder without basic medical knowledge of what to do, and they just rush to the scene to help the person out of zeal and passion and carry that person up the way they feel they should carry, that it can result in permanent damage to the body of that person, because they went in zealously, passionately, but they didn't have the adequate knowledge there, and so it becomes costly. So you can be passionate, but if you do not have knowledge there, then what happens is it can be counterproductive. It can even be damage, doing damage, all right, to your own self and to the particular situation. So what's the knowledge they didn't have that Paul was talking about? He says, he went on and said, he says, for they being ignorant of God's righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves to the righteousness that is of God. So what were they ignorant of? Now remember Romans 1:16 says, the gospel is the power of God, for therein is the righteousness of God revealed. So it tells us they've been ignorant of this righteousness. In other words, there will be no access to power. It says even though we are praying for them, all right, we ain't seen the results because they were ignorant of this righteousness. And then going about to establish their own. So that zeal was being used in what we'll call today religious activities that were not the very righteousness of God. So all kinds of activities they were doing to try to please or to appease God. When I was coming, I was listening to Roy Hicks, and he was saying this about a woman this was many years ago. All right, he was saying a woman was talking about someone. She had an open vision with Jesus, and that in the open vision here, that Jesus was dancing. They were somewhere worship, and Jesus was dancing, and she came to dance. No, she was dancing, and Jesus came to dance with her in her vision there. And when Jesus was dancing, it looked like he didn't know how to dance. So she said, "You don't know how to dance," and Jesus said, "It's because you are leading." You get what I'm saying here? What he's trying to say is that when, instead of submitting to his own righteousness, you are trying to establish your own righteousness, it will look like God doesn't know how to do it. That is only when you follow him that you get in rhythm. If you are the one who wants to establish it, understand this here. If you are the one who is not submitting to the righteousness that he has. Now we're going somewhere with this part. So a person can be praying and they are extremely zealous for God. And you're wondering, but they're praying and they're very zealous for God. How come, prayers are not working? Nothing. Go somewhere with this. And he says they are ignorant of his own righteousness and are going about to establish their own righteousness and have not submitted themselves to the righteousness that is of God. Last week I was speaking to Bishop Widigba and he told me something. He said the resources of God is in obeying his instruction in details. He said, get the details. He said, we're building a structure and it was very nice, and the architectural design was a D shape. He said, we were sweating for finance, confessing. He said, God told him, the problem is in the design. I never asked you with that design. Change the design to this. He said, we changed the design. It was like the rain started falling. It is in obedience, not sacrifice. Are you following what I'm saying here? This says that, in fact, sacrifice there, you might do more than what was they wanted you to do. So it's in obedience. So being ignorant of his righteousness and going about to establish their own righteousness have not submitted themselves to the righteousness that is of God. So what's this righteousness he now starts speaking about? So he goes on and says, for Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone that believeth. For righteousness to everyone that believes. Now everybody believes, but it's not everybody that has a revelation of his righteousness. Do you get what I'm saying here? Because when you have a revelation of his righteousness, then you step into an area of real faith. That's why the Bible says even demons believe and tremble. So a person says, now get this here, that they believe. That's why people pray in the first place. Can God heal every single person? Yes, they believe. They actually believe it. That you can't ask anybody. Is God capable of doing it? Yes, God is capable of doing it. Okay. So why then doesn't everybody get healed? Your only explanation, therefore, you can bring from sense knowledge is that God is not willing to heal the people because he's capable of healing them. Isn't that the conclusion? Is that not the conclusion? No. Is that not the conclusion? If somebody is capable of doing something, and the thing is not done, then the conclusion is that person is not willing to use their power to do it. Isn't that the conclusion? Which is the demonic conclusion Satan wants to paint. He wants to paint the picture that God is powerful, but he's not loving. In other words, he has the capacity to do it, but the problem is not willing to do it. So there are many things you will have to do to appease him, to make him willing to do it. And if by chance you have appeased him, then he will now act upon it. So the picture he wants to give is a powerful God who is not a father. Because there is no father that will have the ability to help the child there in that desperate situation, all right, except there is hardness of heart. And therefore, the idea, therefore, is that God has hardened his heart towards humanity there. But there is a difference between believing there and this type of faith that he's talking about. In other words, that person may believe God can do something, but really and truly they don't have. So they believe it. Believe means that, they know God can do it. But to have faith means to expect and to be certain that God is going to release or has released his power. There's a sense of certainty concerning that particular thing that person doesn't have. And